semiconductors, for example, but we are using them every day. I thought the topic is highly interesting because, as we have seen with the war in the Ukraine, the semiconductor and integrated circuits crisis may influence the capacity of ranging war. Not only in our civilian lives invaded by technology. As Mr. Bologa likes to say, semiconductors today are the new oil of the 90s, and they are a resource. The big powers are competing fiercely in the global market. I want to introduce the topic for our distinguished guests. With the help of our colleagues, we performed a small research. From the mid-80s, the American President Ronald Reagan was talking about the need to preserve USA supremacy in terms of chips, to preserve or to counteract the Soviet military forces, and mentioned among intelligence systems the systems based on semiconductors, satellites, intelligent ammunition. What is currently the global situation? USA, the production which before the 90s represented 37% of the global production, have starting 2 years ago only 15%. China, with a very fast progression in the semiconductor production and intends to become a world leader by 2030. The South Korea, specialized in all manufacturing stages, but still cannot cope with the global demand. Taiwan, who is dominating and has the most advanced production with more than 60% of the global market, Japan 6% and Europe around 10%, and the ambition to reach 20% of the global production in the next coming years. We could all notice lately the crisis in the semiconductor supply which affected our daily lives. So what is our situation as a country? What are the perspectives? I will invite now the Minister of Research, Innovation and Digitalization in Romania to provide some inputs on research and innovation in Romania in the semiconductors field. Minister.
Mulțumesc frumos, domnule NIţU.
Thank you very much,
distinși oaspeți, mă bucur să ne vedem și să ne revedem. Este o onoare să fiu la un asemenea eveniment și vă felicit că, iată, continuați această tradiție la un standard remarcabil pentru România și pentru regiune de departe. Sunt convins că ne face concurență panelul pe energie, este în regulă și tema pe care o abordăm astăzi împreună este cel puțin la fel de importantă din punctul meu de vedere. Și pornesc de la un lucru simplu pe care îl spun de câte ori am ocazia și pe care sigur că dumneavoastră îl cunoașteți, dar el trebuie spus.
But we need to say that.
Creșterea economică este despre productivitatea individuală a muncii. România nu are pârghie demografică să-și accelereze dezvoltarea economică, deci trebuie să mizeze pe inovare și creșterea productivității muncii pentru fiecare român. A recuperat față de media Uniunii Europene, deci există proces de convergență.
Compared to the European average, so there is convergence, but unless we have endogenous innovation produced in our country, we cannot speak of long-term economic growth. And obviously here we have a lot to do.
Am scris acum un an și ceva o carte, Planul pentru România, și am vorbit acolo de cei 4 piloni de care România viitorului are nevoie. Și primul, România inovării, pentru că trebuie să ajungem la stadiul în care nu mai ne uităm la
because we need to reach that level where we don't look at others who are much ahead and we are condemned to strive and catch up, but it should be up to us to give the world the avant-garde signal. The second pillar is the Romania of connectivity, the third, the green Romania, and fourth, the safe Romania. I invoked the famous liberal principle with our own forces. In the current world, which broke down from an integrated global world into a world of regional blocks, and this is not something new. But this has become obvious with the pandemic, with the Ukrainian conflict. We are doomed to produce the essential resources we need ourselves and obviously integrated in the European family.
Semiconductorii sunt o componentă esențială pentru viitor. Sunt o componentă esențială și pentru prezent. Nu știu cum, cine și-ar putea imagina viața fără toate dispozitivele care includ tehnologia bazată pe semiconductor, pe nanotehnologii în general. Se întâmplă lucruri și în România și vreau să vă dau câteva vești bune, poate în premieră.
There are good things in Romania as well, and I want to give you the good news, maybe as a first, for you to know how Romania has prepared the European cycle, the next one, future structural funds, and the resources we have in our country to facilitate such investments. But before that, I would like to say that the first element Romania needs, and we need to start with that.
Resursa umană.
First, it's people, human resources.
Avem în fiecare an performanțe cu care ne mândrim, sigur, pe bună dreptate. Degeaba suntem în clasamentele all-time, în toate timpurile, pe podium, la informatică, la fizică, la chimie, la matematică. Pentru un popor de 20 de milioane de suflete, nu e o performanță tipică. Deci avem cea mai importantă resursă a rețelei, și ne întrebăm cum o pregătim pentru a
and the question is, how do we train this resource to contribute in the future economy, in the semiconductors production? What kind of involvement we have in the technology chain, design, niche, production, and so on. In Romania, there are several centers of excellence, and I don't know how many people speak about it. We have national research institutes. Some of them, a good part of them, are at the Măgurele platform. I went there, I visited, and in part, I also understood what those people are doing. There are 47 institutes coordinated by the ministry I represent, and some of them are actual examples of excellence. For example, the Institute for Physics of Materials, which is part of a future hub for
apropo de cum pregătim perioada următoare, România a gândit în POCIDIF, viitorul program operațional competitivitate, câteva proiecte strategice de țară. Două sunt de interes pentru tema noastră de astăzi. Primul este chiar legat de nanotehnologii și semiconductori și va fi un consorțiu de institute de cercetare și Institutul de Microtehnologie, acolo și Institutul de Fizica Materialelor și
Institute of Physics, Materials, Timișoara, Cluj, Polytechnica University, a consortium which will benefit from more than 100 million euro, quite a generous allocation. And this will help us strengthen both expertise, funding, and projects developed by research institutes. And if you ask me, I believe this is the niche Romania should pursue. I know we speak a lot about the cheap labor in Romania and how we could take advantage and decouple from Asia by attracting in Romania substantial investments. There are capital-intensive investments costly investments helping us to manufacture these technologies. I think it would be smarter to focus on a much higher added value area, research, experimental production, which will later on be transferred into production facilities elsewhere. So we will have this hub, and there will be another very important hub, the artificial intelligence hub with similar financial allocations, because getting back to human resources, Romania has among the best mathematicians in the world, and artificial intelligence, this is what artificial intelligence is all about. We have a plan to use Romanians back home, the Romanians in diaspora, and I'm already in contact with brilliant minds from MIT, for example, postdoc students in MIT, Harvard, Berkeley, all greatest university centers across the world. Either they will return home or we give them the opportunity to be involved in these research projects. Together with at least 4 universities in the country, we also focus on the transfer of technology developed by this AI hub. So we have funding, we have large European projects, hundreds of millions of euro, major projects of joint European interest, major projects in which Romania is a party, but I believe that the model Romania should follow is the public-private partnership. In July, if I'm not wrong, I could see that President Biden announced a very important grant scheme. I think it's about $53 billion for private companies which invest in semiconductor production. This is a huge stake for Romania. Maybe it's too big and maybe we should tackle it at European level. In my viewpoint, this would be key so that we do not lose this race, because it is a race, and at European level we are already disadvantaged by mechanisms that mean more bureaucracy, more procedures, so more time wasted. So I would rely on cooperation with the private environment. Romania already has some large private companies. I visited less than a month ago an American company, Microchip, and they have more than 30 engineers who design and test microchips in Bucharest.
care pot fi foarte ușor replicate. Și mă apropii de final.
These are examples that can be easily replicated. And I'm nearing the end. So we have funding, at least at a level at which Romania can make a difference and large added value, maybe added support. We need access to markets and investors, and I've mentioned this some time ago. And shortly this dream will come true of having an agency of attracting foreign investment and promoting export. Romania used to have them. It was called Paris, then Invest Romania, and now there are 4 to 10 people left in the Ministry of Entrepreneurship and Tourism that should handle the entire policy of attracting investments in Romania. Poland has 300. Hungary has 1,500 people in specialized investment agencies that go to the airport and roll down the red carpet to an investor, very quickly solve all licenses and bureaucracy, and don't know how to keep them happy. That's why investors go in urban Hungary, because they know how to welcome them in certain sectors. In other sectors where the interest of the urban government is another, they are bought. And let me conclude by saying one thing. We need the mentality. If the 12 years of living in America taught me something, and if my American wife teaches me something every day, is that you shouldn't be any subject. You shouldn't be subject to any inferior complexes or any other such type. And semiconductors, nanotechnologies are such a topic. AI is another related topic. Virtual reality, all of the things that we already excel at individually. We have one big, short, famous football player in any such field. So we have to just integrate the people in the efforts at the government level. So the mentality and the courage, even to fail, of dusting off and then starting again. Again, thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue. Thank you, Minister. I jotted down some ideas because I want to introduce the next speaker. As I said, though, we are not technical people. We don't talk about building the semiconductor, but what should Romania do, or how ready we should be when we will probably start assimilating and producing them. Romania needs innovation in a model of long-term economic growth, and I'm referring to semiconductors, AI, and others. But it also needs to find out the phases and to look to new technologies and not to reinvent the wheel or hot water, and to take a look at those circuits where semiconductors can maybe set us aside, set us apart from other competing states. So we need mentality, we need courage, but what type of technologies of semiconductors can we rather favor? For this, I will give the floor to Mr. MANEA, the CEO in the Romanian Commercial Bank. And thank you for being here, Mr. MANEA. Hello. Good news is that we bring rain where we make it rain. And this is a good thing with respect to food security, although maybe on the last leg of the race. Referring to today's panel, I'm not going to talk about the technology, but about the approach to it. So I will be polite and say, thank you, Mr. NIİșU, for your introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. And given the sound background, thank you for hanging in there. I'll refer to ecologies. We define revolutions as elements with tectonic consequences that generate cultural change, ideological change, and maybe paradigm shifts. And this is how we define revolutions in general. We are right and we are also wrong at the same time, because any revolution that was and lived was joined or accompanied by an economic model. It was generated or accompanied by a revolution not only of the economic model but also of the approach or the technical model. What happens today is that we are in fact living a technological revolution. That is the revolution of the economic models constantly. And let me refer only to what happened in the past 50 years. I won't refer to resilience, I won't refer to security, and I won't refer to the war. I will refer to the fact that technology has brought out of extreme poverty 2 billion people in the past 50 years, and this is a number that I would like you to think of alongside me. You know this, what happened with internet, technology, automation, connectivity. We know this, we see this, we live this. From the so-called digital natives to us, those that are nearing our sunsets, and I'm referring here to myself. We learn and adapt every day. We know, we live it. But what happens next? How do we answer to this continuous revolution, creating other revolutions, other changes? And today I will speak a bit of creating and setting the background about the big data systems. And I'll refer to it in English as big data. Because Romanian has taken the phrase as well. We speak of big data, small data, but we don't speak data yet. We speak most of the time of data as reference and ex post. We use data very little to look ahead. We use data even less to make decisions. Why? Because this is how we are built. Today we collect data to argue and to support decisions that were already taken. Well, things change. Things change with a scale presence of big data systems. We already see them, we read about them, but the applicability of the big data systems into elements that relate to prosperity, education, health, agriculture, industry, supply chains, anything will change completely all this framework of economic activity. And we have this great accelerator that, please, you should not forget. This was COVID-19, and unfortunately, in Europe, joined by a bloody conflict. The things that we used to believe and think of data, from access to energy, access to food, access to semiconductors, access to chips, microchips, is not guaranteed. No longer guaranteed. Given the two contexts, lack of guarantees in new oil, as Răzvan called it, or the lack of guarantee in any type of supply chain, well, it's very important to think of decisions based on data and AI as part of the critical set of tools of the present, not of the future. What does this mean? We have the obligation, not the duty, to rebuild value chains and to find value chains, global value chain, so that we can have at least one option in the entire value chain on data and AI, which means what? Data, servers, machines, algorithm, research and development, and people. Something about money, because I guess you expect me to refer to money too. In 2021 alone, a difficult year for the entire world from all perspectives. $100 billion were invested in AI startups. Let's understand what $100 billion is. 3 times the GDP of Estonia. It's the GDP of Ukraine in 1 year. And the dynamic of these resource allocations is purely crazy. Let me give you another element. I like trivia, that's how I understand this, with respect to progress in AI. China built a model of AI in 2 trillion parameters, so they include 2 trillion parameters, which means 10,000 times more comprehensive, stronger, and deeper than what was produced in the world 5 years before. So this is the type of progress.
Nu trebuie să știi în detalii, nici eu nu le știu și înțeleg foarte puțin din asta, dar înțeleg puțină matematică și puțin mai multă statistică.
I understand a bit of mathematics and a bit more of statistics.
Puneți, vă rog, de la 0 la 100 de miliarde.
So add from 0 to 100 billion in the next 7 years and from 0 to 10,000x. And let's try to write a function in mathematics. Let's try to put it in statistics. I'm not saying that we're going to forecast this in the future, far be it from me. But certainly this type of resource allocation and of human capital and of another resource that we don't speak of is the strategic focus, which is a resource in fact. It's not an approach, it's not a behavior, it is a resource. So these three resources that we refer to, allocated to the AI, will change the world. In this context, Sebastian referred to human capital and the ability to build human capital. Răzvan will mention of this even more. We have this obligation today to go towards this path. AI means that we will have smart systems that will solve things autonomously, will help us make decisions. All right. AI is somehow the peak of a technological architecture. At the foundation of this architectural technological architecture, you have semiconductors, microchips, and so forth. And why do I mention this? Because it is proven that the industry of semiconductors and microchips itself will have to go through a technological change so as to keep up from the perspective of the computing capacity and the systems capacity to support AIs to help us reach these objectives. So we have this great opportunity that we could really think of at least. We have semiconductors, each of us right now at this time, in our, at least here, in our phones. I'm not saying that I have them in my head as well, but one day this will happen because we speak of meta-human. And what's it called?
Technological readiness se cheamă.
The technological readiness. We are not at 0. From a scale of 1 to 9, as far as meta-human goes, that is also AI and mechanical capacities, we are at the 3 or 4 level, on a scale of 0 to 9. So these things exist. Therefore, coming back to one of my previous ideas, we have had this tendency of believing semiconductors of being a given. Today we have the proof, and Mr. NIιστU referred to this and to global changes. These are not a given. We have a great concentration risk, and I am not going to talk about military aspects. I don't know about that, but I can tell you about health, food security, I can tell you of education. So in this continuous revolution, filled with passion, as you notice, we need to set objectives. It's a matter of architecture. We will start with the strategic focus because we speak of resources. These are a given in a decision-making process. So where do we want to be? What do we want to do to be able to say something? It's about automotive industry, where Eastern and Central Europe play a great role, avionics or autonomous avionics. I don't know. Do we speak of food security, food safety? I don't know. Do we speak of robots, functional or educational robots? I don't know. But what is very important is that we have to set the foundation to make this decision. And yes, we will have to make a choice. What I can tell you today is that none of the choices will be wrong. None of them will be wrong. But
așa cum ne place nouă să vorbim și să spunem la nivel de clasă mondială,
we want to do it and
va trebui
say
să
at
creăm o arhitectură care să ne
level, we'll have to create the architecture to take us there, and this architecture only replicates a value chain. Education, continuous education, production, ideas, design, assembly,
și din nou.
And again, repeat.
Toate conduse de un mecanism decizional
all led by a decision-making mechanism that is basically anchored in the revolutionary changes that we are living.
Asta înseamnă, în afară de această arhitectură de care am vorbit puțin mai devreme, înseamnă de asemenea că va fi nevoie să creăm acele 100 de miliarde la scala României, bineînțeles de astăzi.
At the Romanian scale today, of course, how? By undertaking programs and trying to create ways of bringing direct foreign investment. Focus on this path. We will have to stimulate local entrepreneurs irrespective how mature they are or immature along the entire chain from research institutions, startups that spin out of research institutes to mature companies. And last but not least, to speak out and write what could strategic PPPs be for Romania. Last but not least, the value in this architecture comes from the market, comes from the consumption. It is our duty of us here, irrespective which state we represent, to create from the environment or the ecosystem in Romania a sustained consumption, continuous consumption of these elements.
Aceste elemente de nou ne vor garanta viitorul. Aceste elemente înseamnă, de fapt, nu că ne transformăm, ci că începem să ne adaptăm la revoluțiile globale de azi. În concluzie,
to conclude,
să căutăm oameni,
let's look for
și să
people,
mobilizăm diaspora.
let's rally up our
Să
diaspora,
educăm pe acei
let's
oameni,
educate
începând
those
foarte,
people
foarte devreme
very
și începând,
early,
de fapt,
and in
cu
fact,
acel vârf
starting
al
with that
piramidei.
peak
Să educăm în
of the
date
pyramid, to
și în
educate them
machine
in
learning și în
data and
artificial
machine
intelligence.
learning and artificial
Să facem din
intelligence.
artificial intelligence o fundație,
Let's turn AI into a foundation, not just as part of the curricula, but of how we build dynamic curricula and how we build education for every child and for every element of power and strength of that child. And with AI, we can do this.
Și să ne gândim dacă nu cumva astăzi, având în vedere și situația globală, e momentul în care putem ridica mâna cu mândrie și cu capul sus și să spunem vrem să începem să construim semiconductori în România.
Semiconductors in Romania. And we can do this because we have the human capital, we have the moral capital, and we live and grow in values. This is very important, even for future, including for future beneficiaries. Let's allocate based on how we use the first resource, the strategic focus as a resource, to allocate money and funding programs. And last but not least, let's be the first buyers of these new approaches and of the new technologies. Thank you very much and enjoy the rain.
Mulțumim foarte, foarte mult, domnule Manea. Foarte multe teme.
Thank you,
de
Mr.
interes.
Mana. Very many topics of interest. I've jotted down some ideas to link it to the next speaker.
technology versus poverty, how much we've gained in the past 50 years. The new technologies, especially big data, the accelerators of technologies that you mentioned, in difficult contexts that we are going through now with COVID and the war in Ukraine. But I also remember, I jotted down one idea that is common to with the one from Mr. BURDUJA. Romania needs very well-trained human resources, and we want to build semiconductors in Romania. Today, they are currently produced in Taiwan and China. The road of 1,000 eyes starts with the first eye. Mr. BOLOGA, which is the first eye that Romania has to start with in producing semiconductors? Please, take the floor. Thank you. I'm really happy to have this intervention of the last panel, so it's somehow keeping you from the dinner that follows, that I will try to make it as interesting as possible. I also prepared a PowerPoint presentation. Broadly speaking, I have a simple perspective. Romania is trying to export the human capital that it has stood out in the IT industry so far, and is trying to capitalize on that. As mentioned by the previous speakers, semiconductors are very important. You can say under quotation marks that they are the oil of the 21st century. The importance of oil in the 20th century will equal that of semiconductors in the 21st century. Some elements to argue for this hypothesis is that they are found in almost any technological application used broadly in economy. Secondly, they can increase or boost labor productivity, therefore contributing to solving a demographic problem that most countries are facing, the aging population. Third, semiconductors can reduce the consumption of natural resources, making the economy greener and more sustainable. And last but not least, given that we are in a conference on military technologies, semiconductors play, as the previous speakers mentioned, the key role in the military segment as well, because we see components with semiconductors more efficient than the others. The situation of world chains on supplying semiconductors in the past, supplying in the last 30 years, is that basically the US has dominated the design phase. Until the 90s, US had an autonomy on this segment of semiconductors, covering all the 4 areas that you see on the screen. Once the 90s came, the production of semiconductors somehow was moved to Taiwan. If we refer to advanced semiconductors, 99% of the advanced semiconductors are produced in Taiwan, 92%, and the remaining 8% in South Korea. On advanced semiconductors, no other country worldwide is generating anything. You've got a production of semiconductors in Europe, in the US, in Thailand, but these are just some old generation chips. China has the assembly, testing and packaging, and the Netherlands, a less-known European player, has the machinery production. Whenever someone needs to set up a new plant, they need these products made in the Netherlands, including China, including Taiwan, including US. Therefore, what is happening right now is that we speak of a trend to move these chains. China wants to be autonomous on producing semiconductors. We have to say that there have been years in the recent recent history of China, in which the Chinese state has spent more on importing semiconductors than on importing oil. This is a reality that, of course, creates a great temptation for the Chinese government to create an autonomous industry, to have both design, production, testing, packaging in China, and maybe even like machinery tools. So this has caused a break in relations at international level, reason for which many semiconductor plants are repositioning themselves. So Romania has a chance to play a great card, even Romania, in areas that go through repositioning. Basically, you've got 2 and 3: the production of semiconductors that used to be covered, that is covered by Taiwan, and the assembly, packaging and testing areas. If you ask me, the main chances for Romania would be for assembling, packing and testing. It's not less noble. You can have great products, you can bring great value to this. The main problem that this relocation of these world production and supply chains is the lack of talent. In the TSMC Taiwan company aims to open a plant in Arizona, the place where most American semiconductor producers are based, Chandler, Arizona, where most American producers are. They didn't manage to bring or to find enough specialists. There is an opportunity here for Romania and countries, well, the neighboring countries. For the U.S., well, there is a CHIPS Act deficit of 30,000 specialists, in which more than 1/3 will not be covered. So the lack of talent is a great blockage, not necessarily the lack of capital that Mr. MANEA referred to, but the lack of talent that those that are trying to reshape world chains of semiconductors. This is a quote of a politician in Taiwan saying that he was responsible for semiconductors for some time now. Now, if you want to play in this game, you don't have to make plans, you have to innovate and cultivate talent. Now, this is a valid point. This is what allowed Taiwan to become a world player. Basically, the entire world depends on the production of semiconductors of Taiwan, especially on high technology, where you've got the military use of it as well. Taiwan, alongside South Korea, is the place where these semiconductors, these chips are produced. Well, technically speaking, it's not the chips that are produced, but the elements that comprise the chips. I won't take you to the technical details now. Nanometric with 2 integrated circuits. The idea is that this distance has decreased up to the point when they are nearing subatomic distances. So an electron can easily go from an integrated circuit to another. So the difficulties, the technical, scientific difficulties are quite high. That's why educating this large number of specialists is an advantage, a competitive advantage. It's not something generic. We shouldn't speak of an investment in human capital that in 30, 40 years this will yield benefits. It's an actual need that humankind is facing. And if the supply chains will be reshaped massively in the next decade, which most likely will happen, those countries and regions that will manage to generate human capital will be attractive for the investors.
What does Romania do? You should know that things look better in Romania than in other countries in the region against expectations with the support banks, and I want to thank Mr. MANEA for the involvement of the bank he represents. In the past years, we managed to create an Olympics competition in robotics, which covers 60,000 students and 1,700 teachers in 3 years. These are huge numbers. No country can mention such figures. Right now, the Ministry of Education stepped in this project, granting support. There is development. Other sponsors joined. Later on, Dacia, Renault, the Argeș County, actually, I would say that the best schools in robotics right now are in the Argeș County right now, and the most advanced high school teaching school robotics is in Mioveni. And I am very well informed here because all schools participate in our competition, and for years this school from Mioveni ranked top. It is also the merit of regional sponsors who are aware and motivated. The Global World Foundation, the Taiwanese company ASUS, which joined the initiative, starting with 2023 through a project funded by European funds with the Ministry of Education. Romanian schools will see distribution of programmable plates, 216,000 in 5,400 schools. This is equipment used by students to understand better the semiconductor world. Technically speaking, this is a first. In the Eastern Europe at least, there are other countries in Asia at least with similar mechanisms, but I don't know of any other country with a program that covers this scope. Ideally, we should have chips for each student. If every student in Romania would be able to hold a chip in his hand and be able to develop one, Romania would be much better off. It is unlikely that the Romanian government will manage to collect tens of billions of dollars to attract here a company which is interested in this. What matters is the human capital, so if such human capital is also developed through regional cooperation, may be even more attractive than the capital. The costs of such a project would not be very high, and the project can be developed in several clear steps. The first step has already been finalized with the support from BCR and other sponsors. The second step is under implementation due to financial support granted by the Ministry of Education. Steps 3 and 4 can be easily undertaken under NRRP. We can also use funds from the Ministry of Education, from the Ministry of Research, Innovation and Digitalization. For example, I have a project to revive municipal and county community-based libraries. There are many opportunities. The problem is with the school and curriculum reforms, so that such initiatives would stand the chance. They need to be supported by the school and curriculum reform efforts. More specifically, in the IT subject, there should be a mandatory IT subject matter in secondary education. Semiconductors should be part of important exams that every student should pass. Local producers, local semiconductor producers should be encouraged, especially in terms of assembly and packaging, where Romania stands the best chance, because very likely the government in Beijing will try to distance themselves from this role they've had in the past 30 years and assume additional roles, so we see future opportunities here. So there are stakes, but we need an integrated plan and a local project in Romania and also at regional level, because we need quite significant human resources. Now, for you to understand, this is not just an idea or a dream. We managed to assemble something in Romania, in Bucharest, together with the microchip company, and they were assembled and planted in Timișoara. I cannot play the video from here, but I will try my technical colleagues, to play the video, the link. But so far, I will hand you an example here to my colleagues in the panel for you to have a memory of our discussion. We only have sound and no image. If it doesn't work, that's not the problem, but it would be nice for us to be able to see it together. And colleagues will help us with the technical part. There is another video I had prepared with students working, but I will try to end here by saying, right now, Romania needs to teach children to write using chips. Just like centuries ago, they learned to write on paper. Second, they need to implement a program supported by an investment fund to support companies which intend to develop production, semiconductor production in Romania. I can tell you from my own experience that if you go today to invest with a microchip project, you will have the same assessment grid as someone who wants to have a restaurant startup. This is not normal, this is not helpful, and in my opinion, we should have a separate project, a separate fund, which should only finance semiconductor projects to support SMEs, small-sized companies, and once such financial instruments have been developed, if they are doubled by a policy of large-scale semiconductor distribution in schools, there will be very soon results, and Romania probably will become much more attractive for investors in the near future. Thank you very much, and again, I am happy I had the opportunity to deliver this intervention. I want to thank the organizers and the previous speakers. Thank you very much, Professor. I actually wanted to congratulate you for the robotics courses and competitions you organized last year. And now we launch the Q&A session. Please use microphones because it's difficult to hear, and introduce yourselves.
Să nu ne întrebați cum se produc semiconductorii, că aici...
Do not ask me how semiconductors are manufactured, because probably it's only Mr. BOLOGA who can have the overall picture of the production chain.
Bună ziua!
Hello, my name is Robert Olariu.
Am un startup.
I have a startup working with artificial intelligence and AI semiconductors are important. However, the AI software is running on a hard platform. We don't really discuss the next technological leap, which is the quantum leap. So my question for the Minister is, what are the future perspectives on quantum? Thank you, Mr. Olariu. I want to congratulate you for your activity, and I would like to know more about your activity. Romania tackled this topic under two consortia. There was a call from the European Commission, and Romania presented two applications. I don't know whether this is good or not. The European Commission selected the winning project, and we are going to implement it. Obviously, technology involves high costs. I go for investments in people, not in walls. I think we can have access to quantum computing resources from the private environment, not have the state investing in objects. Romania's experience with investments in machines, we still have bad experience with investments in machines which are still not used because no one dares use them. So I would focus more on human resources, but I would be happy to continue applied dialogue. Of course, the education also involved research and education as well. Thank you. Thank you. Other questions, please? If there are no other questions, I will have one. Given the EU ambitions to increase its share in the global production from 10 to 20%, this is according to the European Commission estimates, that requires investments in amount of 160 billion euro in the next 6 years by 2030. How do you think Romania should position itself beyond the national chips mentioned earlier in this cycle, design, manufacturing, assembly? What would be Romania's contribution, to be brief? Different opinions are welcome as well. With all my friendship for Răzvan, I did mention in my intervention, I would position at the beginning of this change, design. Well, of course, we have the expert here, but we have our research institutes, and probably I'm subjective, but in these institutes, we have people, we have capacity, and the added value, the highest added value is in research and design, not only for semiconductors, but for any product. Moreover, the institutes are willing, beyond design, to develop experimental production lines, so relatively small or low-scale production lines that would later on be scaled into larger capacities. I know production capacities have been announced, but not in the Eastern Europe, but in Germany, Nuremberg and Dresden, and maybe in Italy, but we should understand why they chose this. Obviously, we speak here of less clarified concepts. Institutes in Romania can deliver design, but level 3 design, level 1 design, no country outside except the United States would be able to do. Maybe some Dutch companies like Philips, which was later purchased by an American fund. So basically all the semiconductor design part in itself, it's hard to believe this can be done in the near future outside the companies which are prestigious in the field. There are chances for levels 2 and 3, manufacturing levels, which include a design component. There are many things a research institute could be doing, but one of the big players like Samsung, for example, or another significant player should be able to come here and have a factory here, semiconductor plant, for example, and this means huge investments similar to the steel industry a century ago. And I don't know to what extent such a decision can be made in Romania. As far as I know, the European Union had negotiations with TSMC. Eventually, they refused to open such an advanced manufacturing line. In Europe, there are manufacturing lines in Germany, but we are not talking about technologies which are useful for the 4.0 industry or applications such as self-driving vehicles and so on. And there is level 3 where Romania already has several players, both in terms of research institutes and in terms of the private sector, and this would be easier. However, we need here human resources and capital. So, in my opinion, the design part, as long as it is about levels 3, maybe even level 2, is feasible. But I wouldn't be so optimistic about the capacity of Romanian actors to manufacture a chip. Even older generations, so far, even companies benefiting from mega financing could not do it. So I don't think we should assume this risk personally. And there is another niche we should not hesitate to tackle. The raw materials. There are raw materials, especially in Russia and in the Ukraine. For example, the neon, which comes from siderurgy, and during the previous Russian invasion in the Ukraine, the prices exploded 6 times. I think from the 30 critical metals identified in the European Union, quite many of them are in Romania. I'm not a fan of natural resource exploitation. I am a fan of human resource investments, but we should not neglect that. Another question for Mr. Manea. We discussed here about public-private partnerships, about governmental funds which could support innovation and research, about the fund for manufacturing, about European funds and RRP and so on. But you are a banker, first of all. What are the solutions you would recommend for research and for manufacturing? I was hoping you could not hear my answer. The solution is quite easy, and I will start from application. Răzvan talked about what we are trying to do or support. But eventually we need to create mass. We need to start talking about semiconductors and technology. We don't speak this language today. Here, I'm sorry for Sebastian and Răzvan. We need to go to kindergarten and learn speaking semiconductor. We believe very much that in order to advance along the technology chain, we need to develop habits. So we invest in non-equity in an accelerator for technological startups, and we accelerated 130 companies, including during the pandemic. 2 of them kept paid in Krakow, and 3 of them took the stage in Washington in a technology event targeting solely the American public. No. The research and development part. Here, I think Sebastian and Răzvan can talk about it truly. I can't. I am segmenting, and I say that in fundamental research we have the duty to employ the strategic focus and pour money in that. In the applied research, the private sector should understand the society needs and try to provide solutions. And I will give you a solution. We are in a period where we need to live by but use chips. Thank you very much. I apologize if I exceeded my time. I want to thank you for your involvement. I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope that you or your children may receive one of these chips in school, for example, after the project ends. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.